Prior to our dismissal to class, Brother Mark Stutler will lead us in prayer. When the trumpet of the Lord shall sound, and time shall be no more, and the morning breaks eternal, bright and fair, when the saved of earth shall gather over on the other shore, and the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, 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 I'll be there. On that bright and cloudless morning, when the dead in Christ shall rise, and the glory of his resurrection share, the chosen ones shall gather to their home beyond the skies, and the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, 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 I'll be there. Let us labor for the Master from the dawn till setting sun. Let us talk of His wondrous love and care. Then when all of life is over and our work on earth is done, and the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, 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 I'll be there.
Our God and our Father in heaven, we come to you tonight as Christians, as faithful members of the Church of Christ in Barrackville, thanking you for the opportunity that we've had to live another day on a beautiful earth in a beautiful state with good weather. We're thankful that you bless us with good health, the right use of our minds and bodies, and the desire to be here tonight to study from your holy and inspired word. Our Father, we ask it as we do that tonight, as we gather together to open your word, that we would take it seriously, that we would keep in mind that it is the bread of life. It is what sustains us from day to day, and ultimately it's what will save us. Father, please help us to maintain a good attitude about our attendance, about our contributions, about the work that we do for the church in the building, and also, and maybe more importantly, Lord, help us to be an example, and help us to have the right words and the desire to be evangelists, each and every one of us, as we interact with the rest of the world. We do hope and we do pray that our efforts will lead us to have ourselves called someday in that great role and that great and final day, that we would live our lives every day thinking in terms of the end of time, and that the end can come for any of us at any time, and that we would live our lives in a holy and respectful way, interacting with our brothers and sisters in the world in a Christ-like manner, and also spending time in prayer so that we don't lose sight again of our goal, and that's to be in heaven with you someday, and all the saints of all the ages, our friends who have passed on from this place. Father, we pray a special prayer on behalf of Lee and Kinsey and the families. They mourn the loss of our beloved sister Wanda Henthorn, and we are thankful for the faithful Christian life that she led, the inspiration she was to us all. She dealt with some very difficult circumstances. And we know, Father, she is at rest today. Father, carry on Carry us on through this service. Forgive us when we sin. In Jesus' name, amen.
Good evening. Please turn your Bibles to Mark chapter 4. Mark chapter 4. As said to you last week, if you'll remember, we're doing the miracles of Jesus, and we're not really doing any methodical rhyme or reason to them, but I did say that we would look at two of them tonight, partly because they're not that long and they're kind of similar. And the two that we're going to look at tonight are the first one we're going to look at is in Mark 4, verses 38 through 41. And the other one's going to be in John 6. And so the two that we're looking at is Jesus calming the storm, and then the other one is going to be Jesus walking on the water. Both very similar of the miracles. And so that's why I've lumped these two together. Next week, I think we'll look at John 11, the raising of Lazarus from the dead. So we'll look at that one next week. So if you want to remember that one, study that one or whatever. It seems a little warm in here. Richard, if you I don't know what it's set at. I didn't look at it this evening, but it seems a little warm, and I'm seeing some things flopping around. So anyway, anyway, Mark chapter 4, verse 38. Excuse me, 35 is where we're going to start. It says, on that day when evening had come, he said to them, let us go across to the other side. Now, of course, the other side being the other side of the Sea of Galilee. Much of Jesus' ministry was on the shore of and all around the Sea of Galilee. In fact, that's primarily where the majority of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, thanks, Richard, but that's primarily Matthew, Mark, and Luke focus their attention. And John does at some points as well. But they're crossing over the other side. In verse 36, and leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. And the other boats were with him. And there was a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on a cushion. And they woke him and said to him, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? And he awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased and calm. He said to them, Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith? And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him? This text, Jesus is with his disciples. They're in a boat. They're going across the sea. And in the middle of that, they've got a great storm that's out there in the middle of the night. And the Sea of Galilee was known for those storms. Didn't always have them. I mean, there were nights like the disciples went out in Luke chapter 5. They had fished all night and caught nothing. You know, that was probably not a night with the storm. There's also in John chapter 21 when Jesus was walking along the seashore and his disciples had fished all night and they hadn't caught anything then either. And so they're going across the sea, and included in this boat is the same way with the other boat, that there's Peter, Andrew, James, and John. And of course they're fishermen. They grew up on this lake. This is their backyard, so to speak. And so when they get nervous, that's when you got to wonder. That's when you got to worry. When the experts get excited, that's when everybody else should really get worried or get concerned. Interestingly enough, as I mentioned to you Sunday that I went and did a funeral Monday. I had part in one and actually used this text as my thoughts. And the idea that I took from it is what the main part of what the disciples' view was, and that was what they cry out to Jesus. Teacher, don't you care that we're fishing? Of course, the idea that I did, and it's not really what I'm going to look at tonight, but I just want to go ahead and mention it. The idea was that I developed in that was that certainly Jesus helped them. Jesus addressed their issue. And then I also, in the course of my comments, read the song in our songbook called Does Jesus Care? And I think it's a very fitting thing to note that Jesus does care about our circumstances and our life and such. And so anyway, I just wanted to go ahead and mention that. But Jesus, in this windstorm, where is He? He's down the bottom of the boat, in the bottom back part of the boat. What's He doing? Sleeping. And He's sleeping on a cushion, and water's coming in the boat. It's probably not going to be too long until that cushion is either going to get soaked or start floating. You know, if there's a lot of water in there, I mean, He is in the lowest part of the boat. In the lowest part of the boat, you know, if you've ever been in a boat, the lowest spot, that's where the water goes. So clearly, you know, He's in a place where the water is going to end up, and He's calm. He's fast asleep. And the disciples come to Him, and they say, "Do you care? Don't you care that we are perishing?" And when you look at that and you think about that, you know, did Jesus care about that situation? Why do you suppose He was asleep in that moment? He was human, yeah. You know, the obvious reason why was He asleep? He was tired. And it's another glimpse of that humanity that you see. You know, they had been going, you know, they've been going about teaching. They've been going on to different things. And so if you take, you know, the previous section, he's talking about the parable of the mustard seed and the parable of the seed growing and a lamp under a basket. And so this is apparently one of the great days that he was teaching and teaching a lot of these things. And so it was at the end of one of these that he was very tired. And I'll tell you, you know, you may not realize it. I get at least a little glimpse of it since I preach. But I tell you what, I've had days, you know, in which I spent all day chopping firewood or whatever, or mowing grass and stuff like that, and you're tired. But if you've been teaching or preaching a significant amount of time, that's actually even more tiring than doing a lot of physical labor. If you, and certainly I'm not complaining, don't take it as that, because it's a good tired when you're there. But if you've, what's that? It's more of a mental tired, yeah. But when you've taught Bible class and preached a couple times, and of course Jesus probably spoke longer than I do on a given Sunday, you're mentally, emotionally tired. And then you feel the physical tiredness of that. So, yes, absolutely. This is a window into his humanity. That his humanity, he's wore out. And he's in the bottom of the boat, tired. Anything else you notice in that?
Going through if you've ever been during a storm like this, sleeping is not the normal thing they're doing.
Oh, no. That's not a normal thing to be doing. Yeah, he's at peace. And it might also emphasize just how tired he is. He's not worried. In all honesty, who is in control? Yeah, he's in control. Or at least his Father, who is going to watch out for him, is in control. And so he's well aware that nothing's going to happen. Nothing bad is going to happen. He had dealt with the crowds, and so. Yeah. Right. Yeah, he's tired from how busy he's been, and he is, taking a break. He's at peace, he's at rest. And so he is there in the bottom of the boat, and the disciples are very concerned, and he's not. Of course, he's got a lot of understanding they don't have. And when you are the God that said, "Let there be a sea," after all, on the third day, God spoke. And of course, when we realize, John chapter 1 and Colossians 1 and other places tell us that Jesus was a full partner, full maker in all of creation. When you're the one that made the sea, it's not such a scary thing. When you're the one, because see, on the third day, the land and the seas and all those things, the land came out and therefore formed the seas and everything with that. When you're the one that formed the sea, a little bit of waves is not that big a deal. And so he is at peace. He is not worried. And so his disciples, however, are. They're very concerned. We're not told which one said that to him, but it says they. So it's probably more than one of them said it. That they, as a group, said, maybe not in stereo, but they as a group said, "Don't you care what's going on here? We're in trouble, and that we are perishing." He is. They do not say, "We are going to perish." It's, we are perishing. We are in the act of perishing. They really feel, whether correctly or not, of course we know it was incorrect, that they were at the moments of death. And so this is not just a little bit of wind, not just a little bit of waves. And so it is such that they were very scared. And then he woke, and he rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Have you ever tried that, be honest? Or at least have you ever wanted to do that? Maybe it was getting ready to storm and you had a picnic planned and you said, you weren't trying to be blasphemous about it, but you just kind of wished you could do that, Obviously, I'm going to guess it didn't work, but it would be nice. It would be nice to call your own weather. It would be nice to say, "Be still." And he did that. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. It was not over time, it was immediate. It was immediate to the point that they were amazed. He said to them, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" What's interesting is that in this instance, when does Jesus calm the storm? Calms it immediately, doesn't he? And then he turns to them. I almost would see, in a way, him say, don't you have faith, and then calm the storm. But I think what you can see there is he recognizes their sheer terror and the immediacy of the situation. And he calms the storm, and then he addresses them. And so when you see that, he asks, why were they so afraid? And you don't have faith at this point? I've been in some situations that were stressful, but I'm really thankful for who I had with me, because I knew they had it covered, at different times, or were in situations that things were not, they were going to be pretty rough, but I knew I had somebody good with me that knew what they were doing and could handle the situation. There's some of those people that, I would walk down a dark alley with, I'd be okay. I'd be more afraid of anybody else if they met us, because of who I had with me. But here they are, and who have they got in the boat with them? Well, they apparently don't know, okay? They're growing in their faith, and they're learning in their faith, but look at what they say to each other. They're filled with great fear. Now, you notice something that's amazing? They were greatly concerned when they woke him up. Now they're filled with great fear. You know what? They're probably more afraid now the storm stopped. Because as scary as that storm is, whoever can just say, stop. So what's the common thread? They're going to be afraid, aren't they? You know what? A lack of faith will do that to you. Struggling in your faith and not having the understanding will cause... And it's not the storm that needed to be calmed to help them with their faith. It's just they had not learned to trust Jesus. You see, if they trusted Jesus the way that they should, the storm wouldn't have scared them, and the calm wouldn't have scared them either. And so here they are. They're concerned enough to wake him and say, "Don't you care that we're perishing?" And now that he calms it, now they're filled with fear. And they say to one another, "Who then is this?" That'd make a great sermon title right there, wouldn't it? Who then is this? Who is this? And of course, when you recognize it's the disciples asking that question, that even the wind and the sea obey him. Oh yeah, and they're gonna. This is early in his ministry. They haven't even seen anything yet. They've got amazing things yet to see, and yet they're going to learn about him. But you're right. It takes a lifetime to get that. Kathy?
Yeah, two things are striking about that. The first thing is they're not saying, "Wake up, you're going to die. We are going to die."
Yeah, we are perishing. Yeah.
And also, why would they wake him and ask him, "Don't you care if we're dying?" If they didn't have an expectation of his being able to do something about it.
Yeah, or at least care, or at least care about what's going on. Yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, they had a faith in him. It was not sufficient enough for the moment, but they had faith in him, and yet they want to know why he's not caring and why he's not concerned, why he's not doing something. have you ever in life, maybe not been in this kind of storm, but figuratively been in a storm? And have you ever prayed, maybe not quite like this, but have you ever prayed what in essence is, don't you care that I'm perishing? Don't you notice I'm getting clobbered? And sometimes it can feel like maybe He doesn't care, or that He's asleep on a cushion somewhere. But what is the real answer? Does He care? Does He see? Does He know? And the answer is absolutely yes on all those accounts. Just because He doesn't jump up and fix the problem as soon as the wind starts up doesn't mean He cares any less. You know, when you look, and time's not going to allow us to really look at this, but maybe I'm sure some of you remember this. If you don't, it's a great read. Acts chapter 27. It's the Apostle Paul on his way to Rome. And they're in the boat going to Rome. And you remember how long that storm was that they were stuck in? 14 days at least. Because they've been on 14 days stuck in this storm. And they could not direct their course. They couldn't go where they wanted to go. They were at the mercy of the storm for 14 days. I can't imagine how awful that'd be. You know, if you get a little bit seasick pretty easily, that's just got to be the worst thing in the world to imagine. 2 weeks of that. And at the end of that 2 weeks, it says that the angel of the Lord came to Paul and told him that everybody's going to make it out if you do what I say. And that was that they were to take a meal, they were all to eat, and then they were immediately to dump all the cargo, including all the food provisions, overboard so that the ship would be lighter, and that they were to run it into the beach, crash the ship, and then they were, because it was at the beach, they were able to jump off and get on the island that they were coming into. And that's exactly what happened. That was the island of Malta. That was the island where a little later on that evening, when they built a big fire to warm up and dry off, that Paul went to get some sticks, and that's where the viper bit him on the hand, and the people were looking at him, the people from Malta, and said, oh, he must have been a murderer, and God has judged him anyway. And a few minutes later, they watched him, and he kept on being fine, and he went from being a murderer to, he must be a god, you know. And then he healed the chief man of the island, I think it was his father-in-law or somebody, healed somebody on the island, and all that afterwards. But it's a really great read. But 14 days, and you know what? The storm did not calm. But in that case, you know what happened? Paul was the one calm. And so sometimes life is like the storm that we have here, that God, through His words, will calm the storm in our life. But then there's sometimes that God calms the child that's in the storm. And that's very much what happened with the Apostle Paul in Acts chapter 27. Like I say, if you're not familiar with that, that's some really good drama, really good reading there, and reading those latter chapters of Acts. And a lot of people haven't read that because it doesn't often get preached on, because it's just historical narrative there. But it's neat story to read and look at, about reading the description of how they tried to save the ship, and how that they did the soundings and found out that there were so many fathoms, and so they were getting shallower, and eventually ran the boat into shore. But God calmed Paul through all of that. And so it's pretty amazing what happens. Any comments, questions? Sure. End of verse 36, and all the other boats were with him, that there were other people going where they were going. All right.
It says now when they had left the multitude, they took him along in the boat as he was.
Just as he was, yeah. I don't know. Just as he was. I mean, I don't know. It might be from the fact that he was tired, worn out, because it had been a long day. And
I get a picture that he spoke, all these multitudes.
yeah,
And however many went with him wasn't nearly the amount of multitudes that were there.
yeah.
He was tired and wore out, perhaps dirty from heat or whatever.
Yeah,
They didn't give him time to go change clothes, take a shower. They just took him as he was.
yeah, it may well have been that he was left. And that's the reason why he's asleep in the bottom of the boat, because he's spent emotionally, mentally, physically. And yeah, that's the only way I could see that, in that sense. And there's other boats with them, which would be really interesting. I'd love to, it would be neat if it was a day and time in which we could interview people in the other boats to see what their experience was and how that it was perilous and then all of a sudden, stopped. Because it makes you wonder too. I mean, there's no real way to know, but could those other boats see the boat that Jesus and the disciples were in? In a rough storm, it's possible he couldn't. We don't know. But there were several other boats with them at that time.
Could that statement, "we are perishing," include the other boats too?
Could. I don't see why it couldn't. I mean, why it wouldn't. But certainly, certainly a possibility. But yeah. And so, yeah, it was a perilous time. But they are amazed. Who then is this? Okay, we want to look at John 6. Any last questions or comments on this particular event? All right, let's go to John 6. I want to look at this one. John 6, the very beginning of it, is where he fed the 5,000, where we looked last week. And then you come to verse 15 at the end of that. When they decide to make him king by force, Jesus withdraws to a mountain by himself. And meaning by himself, he does not take his disciples. And so, when it comes evening, his disciples went down to the sea and got in the boat and started across the sea. And so, they have gone on. They've apparently been directed by Christ to go ahead and go and leave him. And so they get in the boat and go on the sea. Jesus can take care of himself. He gets in. They get out to the sea. They get in the boat and they start across the Sea of Capernaum. Now, the Sea of Capernaum is also the Sea of Galilee, the Sea of Gennesaret, the Sea of Tiberias. Same sea. Same sea. They're going to Capernaum, but it's the sea they're talking about, Sea of Galilee. So they're going to Capernaum, which is on the other side of the sea from where they are. It's one of the towns that's there. It says it was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea became rough because the strong wind was blowing. And when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, so they've gone a long ways. About 3 or 4 miles, they don't know because, you can't really measure things in the night and the windstorm, but they knew they'd gone a ways. They saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near them. They were frightened. So, they are afraid. And so they're not sure about what is going on. they are in this boat, and they've begun across the sea. And as they've begun across the sea, the storm gets rough, kind of like the last event we just looked at. And so they are out there, and they're stuck out there in the middle of this storm, and it's only getting worse. And so, with this storm going on, they're rowing as best they can. And of course, in the middle of a storm like that, rowing hard doesn't often get you very far, because the wind, the storm is blowing, and it's blowing extremely hard, and they're not having much success in where they're going. And so, because of this, they're struggling along, and then what do they see out on the water? Okay? Jesus is walking to them. And so what's their thoughts about what they see? You know, they're afraid.
They know they're 3 or 4 miles out and there's no land.
Yeah, they know they're quite a ways out. They know they're a long way out there. They know that even though they're, far out there on the sea, what is there going to be out there with them? Maybe another boat in a similar situation, but not much else, is there? And so anything they see out there is something that they're very much concerned about. And he says to them, they're frightened, they're afraid, and he says, "It is I. Do not be afraid." Now, when you notice he says that to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." What do you notice about that?
He's identifying himself, number one, who they're seeing. But also, it doesn't say, are they afraid of him or are they afraid of the storm? It just says they're afraid.
Right. Yeah, and does he identify who it is?
No, he just says it is I.
It is I. Yeah, it is I. And so, what about this, that him being "it is I," he tells them that. Let's go over to Matthew. Mark this here real quick. I don't want to muddy things too much, but mark there where we are and go to Matthew chapter 14. Matthew 14 is another account of this. And in Matthew 14, when they see him out there, what do they think? They think it's a ghost, don't they? So that's interesting, isn't it? What else is there going to be out there in the middle of the water? And he says, what's that?
It's dark.
Yeah, it's really dark. And so what do they probably see? They probably see that white seamless coat that we see that Jesus had on when he was crucified. It's likely what he wore, a white robe. And it's windy. And so what's that going to look like out on the water? Just exactly what they said. They said, and he says, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." He doesn't say it is Jesus. He says, "It is I." Now, when you look at that theologically and recognize that, who did God say he was to Moses in the burning bush? He says, "I am. It is I," essentially. It is I. And so Jesus in that storm says, "It is I." Now, how did they know who it was? Because they knew his voice. They recognized his voice. When he spoke, they knew who it was. And he could say, "It is I." People you know really well, and because they partially have caller ID, you don't always have to easily identify who it is that you're talking to because you know their voice. And you don't have to be told who it is. And so, Jesus said, "It is I, do not be afraid." And so they acknowledge that. Now the text in John chapter 6 does not include the most remarkable part of this, but it's where we looked at last week, so I mentioned it first. But in Matthew 14, it is expanded, has more details to it. One of those in the boat, Peter, when he hears, "It is I, do not be afraid," what does Peter say? "Lord, if it's you, command me to come out to you on the water." If it is you, and what does Jesus say? Come. And what does he do? He comes out, and he gets started, and he does just fine, doesn't he, for a little bit? What does the text say? He saw the wind and the water. You know what I think of when I read this? I think of Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner. Remember Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner? Roadrunner could run on air, and Wile E. Coyote could too, until what did he do? When he stopped and he looked down, and moved his feet and realized where he was, that he'd just run off that cliff, and then he went down. So, you know, the Roadrunner could run on air, and Wile E. Coyote could run on air until he realized where he was. And as soon as he realized where he was, down he went. Now, that's cartoon, of course, but it's the same kind of thing that Peter was able to go on the water until he realized really where he was and what he was doing. He looked at the wind, or felt the wind, looked at the waves, and he began to sink. Jesus rebuked him for his lack of faith, but you know what? He is the only other person besides Jesus that walked on water. He did go a ways. Yeah, he had more. And I would say, and I've heard many others say this as well, better to be soaking wet, having walked on water, than to be one of the other 11 and never did it. And so, you only do well when you dare, when you do as Jesus said. Jesus said, "Come." And Peter went, and those in the boat, they all worshiped him, it tells us in verse 33. And they worshiped him, and what do they say? "Truly, you are the Son of God." And so there it is that they get together, and that takes place. And so, you tried to water ski? I tried once, yeah. I did a little better holding on to an inner tube. I did better with that. That's more my speed. Now, actually, my real speed is a canoe. I got one of those this year, and that's more my speed. You know, I only go as fast as I can paddle, so that's not bad. So, unless I hear the banjo music, and then you paddle faster, I guess. But anyway, any last questions or comments?
I think that point you brought out about the cartoons is such a valuable point for us that we need to really lock that into our mind and our heart. That we go through emotional trials and traumas and storms, and just as severe as these physical storms were. And we need to keep our focus on the cross and on God, on heaven.
Yeah.
And not focus out here in the world. And I've said that a lot and used this passage for that. It was only when he took his eyes off of Christ he began to sink.
Yep, it's when he.
Valuable in our lives.
That's absolutely right. He only sank when he took his eyes off Christ and worried about where he was. And when we take our eyes off Christ, we're sunk. Same deal. Thank you. Good evening. This evening, if you were in our auditorium class, you know we talked about two different events from the life of Christ. One of them being when Jesus calmed the sea by saying, "Peace, be still." And the other one, when he walked on the water and went to his disciples. Now, I just say that to you to catch you up if you weren't in this. One verse we didn't cover, but I want to cover for our thoughts here, save this for the end here to talk about, is in John chapter 6, verse 21. At the end of all of this, we did not cover verse 21, that when Jesus walked to the water, and of course after Peter had his sunk in the water, and when Jesus gets to them, it says in verse 21 of John 6, when they hear it's Jesus and they know it's him, and Peter has his interaction, read this statement here, verse 21. Then they were glad to take him into the boat. You betcha they were glad to take him in the boat. You know, they saw walking on the water what they thought was a ghost, and Jesus coming to them. And then, of course, with Peter, and were they glad to have Jesus in the boat? You betcha. They were happy to have him in the boat. They were glad to take him in the boat. And what does it say? And immediately the boat was at the land where they were going. You see, they were all concerned and they were afraid, but they were really close to the end. They just didn't know it. But when Jesus gets with them and Jesus is with them and the sea is stopped and it's okay, then they immediately get to where they're going. And it's only when they got Jesus there with them, in the boat with them. And although, literally speaking, we don't have Jesus in the boat with us, but yet we do have Jesus with us at every moment of our lives. His presence is with us and helps us. And so, when we're in the middle of life's storms and when we're in the middle of the difficulty of this life, remember what Jesus would say to us. That He would come to us and say, "It is I, don't be afraid." Or He would say to us, don't lack in faith. And He would calm the sea, the storm that were there, or at least He would calm us and give us the peace, the strength, and the serenity to make it there. I tell you what, in both these instances, the disciples were terrified. But you know what? They didn't realize it, but they were completely safe in both circumstances. Why? Why were they completely safe? Because of who was with them. They were scared. They were worried. They were afraid. But they were completely safe. And so much of the time, we have anxieties and worries and fears and doubts. But we should remember who's with us. And if the Lord's with us, then we don't need to be afraid. And He can either calm us in the storm, or He can calm the storm. But either way, He's with us. And that's only true, though, if we're one of His children. If we're not one of His children, then He's not with us. And you can change that. We can make that possible, not because of anything we do, but because if you respond to the gospel and give your life to Christ, then you can be a child of His, and His presence can be with you. If you are a Christian and you have gone away from Him, you have wandered away, or you are struggling, and you want us to pray with you and for you, we'll be glad to do that. But with whatever we can do, remember, He's with us. And we don't need to be afraid, and we don't need to worry, because He's there on our side. And so, we must always take that to heart. If we can help you in any way this evening, Would you please come while we stand and sing?
What will you do with Jesus? It comes by night and day. With pierced hands uplifted, he waits. What will you say? What shall it be? What shall it be? What shall your answer be? What will you do with Jesus? Oh, what shall your answer be? What will you do with Jesus? He's knocking at the door. Refuse him, soul, no longer, lest he should plead no more. What shall it be? What shall it be? What shall your answer be? What will you do with Jesus? Oh, what shall your answer be?
We have just a few new announcements. It'll be a Friday night sing at the Central Church of Christ in Clarksburg on October the 12th from 7 to 9 p.m. Anyone be interested in that? Going to that, and there will be a fellowship following that. Also, remember the young ladies class will meet next Sunday, October the 7th. That'll be this Sunday after morning services for an hour. Donna Hall had her hand surgery, and that was successful. Let's all remember he and her family, our sister Wanda Henthorne passed away. The funeral will be tomorrow.